I actually grew up near Gettysburg, and as a kid, I would come here and crawl through these boulders and into the caves at a place called Devil's Den. Certainly one of the most iconic and evocative landscapes in this entire battlefield. My good friend Garry Adelman of the American Battlefield Trust is one of the great experts on Devil's Den, and I've asked him to join us to talk a little bit about this fantastic landscape.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
So tell us, what is Devil's Den and how did it get its name?
So Devil's Den is this pile of rocks, but we still don't even know for sure what Devil's Den actually is. The original story talks about a cave obscured by rocks that's very hard to get into that used to have a spring, and supposedly there was this old 30-foot snake turning gray with age that would eat little kids for breakfast every day. And you know, there were stories about this snake, and they figured they could never kill or capture him, so they called him the Devil. And because he died in his lair, they've called this Devil's Den. That's the story most people go with.
Now, there's some incredible fighting that actually takes place here on the 2nd of July, during the second day of the battle. Tell us about the action that takes place here.
Yeah, so this is July 2nd, 1863, like you said, the second day of the battle, and this is going to be where Robert E. Lee, Confederate Army General Commander, launches the largest attack of the battle, larger than the one that's going to follow it the next day, called Pickett's Charge. 15,900 troops attacking now famous places like Devil's Den, Little Round Top that I'm looking at there, the Wheatfield, the Peach Orchard, and Cemetery Ridge. And as part of this massive attack, the first Confederates to actually hit the enemy, the Union line here, this is around here, New York, Pennsylvania, Maine, and Indiana troops are going to get hit by Georgians, Texans, and Arkansans at this place, Devil's Den. Just unbelievable to think that fate would have these troops from so many different states fight at a place that looks like this.
Now, they're coming from essentially behind you, moving in this direction. The landscape serves as a kind of funnel through here.
Absolutely, and you sort of can't avoid it. You know, if I look way behind me there's a distant tree line. You can see where the Confederates came from, about a mile away, and they're going to end up coming this way. Not only does the terrain help funnel them, but remember, in the Civil War, you've got a guy to your right and a guy to your left, and people behind you. You really don't have a choice where you're going to go. And back then, if there's a thorn bush in front of you, you march through it. If there's a rock in front of you, you climb over it if you can. And if not, you have to go around the obstacle and then try to get back into line, fighting shoulder to shoulder again, and then fighting at a place where you can't possibly keep your alignment. But the fact is, get there first with the most men and the most number of guns, and the way to shoot the most at the same time is in a big long line like that.
Now, one of the ways that when you're advancing your troops like that, maybe you hope you to kind of outflank them, get around the edge.
Yeah.
We're very close to the Union flank, the end of the Union Army. Why might that be a vulnerable spot for the Confederates to attack?
Yeah, just imagine. We can demonstrate it right here. Imagine if a line is like this and you're fighting against an equal number of people. No one really has an advantage. But if you can go like this, suddenly your shots can't miss. If you don't hit this guy, you'll hit this guy, this guy, this guy, or that guy. So getting around the end or the flank of the line or getting into the rear of an enemy is game over for them. If you successfully flank someone, they run away, get shot, or try to reform, okay? So both sides are trying to do it, but of course both sides then put their flanks on rocks, on hills, on streams and mountains, and crest them with artillery. So both sides are thinking to outflank the others. It's when you can't outflank them that the frontal assault, the crazy attacks we see, are necessary.
Now, this is also one of the best documented parts of the battlefield because of the photography that takes place here. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, so it just happens to be, not only did fate bring the soldiers here, but it happened to be that it brought the photographers up from the south to this part of the battlefield at the last part of the battlefield to be cleared of its dead. See, you see all these boulders around us. Well, there's also stone under us. It is very difficult to dig here. So to get these dead into the ground, north and south, the North held this battlefield. They're going to bury their own dead first, and then they're going to bury the Confederates. Well, the photographers arrived after they'd buried the Union dead, mostly, and before they'd buried the Confederates. And most of the photos taken of the dead at Gettysburg are taken here at Devil's Den.
Now, the photography has a huge impact after the war to help us understand what happened here. Tell me about that impact and why the photography is such an important collection of primary source material.
Yeah, I wish most people would put it the way you just did, primary sources. Remember, the photographers were here, and the light that bounced off the glass plate to record an image, those glass plates are still at places like the Library of Congress and the National Archives, and we can use those with unprecedented resolution to not only see what a battlefield looked like, but to understand how things actually were. When a soldier says we attacked a stone wall, there's the stone wall, or they say we fell back to the woods. We know where the woods were. That is, if we take the photo and bring it back out to the battlefield and use those photos. So photos are much more than something that illustrates some sort of a history work. They should be a critical part of the history work.
Now, obviously, the fighting here was awful. It was horrific, but it's still a cool place to explore. You want to show me around some of your favorite spots?
I would love to. Maybe let's walk this way? Yeah. All right.
This was a popular place for the veterans to come back to after the war.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought that this could be a state park or a national park without having a battle fought here. But yes, the wild appearance, and sort of you've got everything, hills, mountains, woods, water, and everything like that, made veterans come back here, and that drew photographers here. And it was photographers who first started to say, you know what, maybe we should put a park here. So one of the photographers was involved with having an electric railway that went from town, across the field of Pickett's Charge, around Devil's Den, and across the face of Little Round Top to lead to a big park called Round Top Park on the other side of Little Round Top. And here, they put a smaller park called Tipton Park, named after this photographer. There was a photo studio, there was 2 places to drink, there was a dance floor, and you could pay a little bit of money and get food, drink, and dance here at Devil's Den. In fact, it got so bad because then at Little Round Top, there's a casino, a roller rink, a brothel for a time, and photographic studios back there. So there was a fight about whether places like Gettysburg would be amusement parks or historic shrines, and happily, we see which one won.
Yeah. The veterans used these parks in a lot of different ways.
They really did. It's, a lot of people don't know how to come to battlefields. When you come to a battlefield, it is a somber place, but in the same sense, battlefields are beautiful. Battlefields are places to learn and reflect, and battlefields are places where you can be irreverent sometimes. There's no exact rule book on how to act, as long as you act respectfully.
So we've got a beautiful view from the spot we're standing at. Tell us what we're looking at.
Yes, so we're looking from Devil's Den across the Valley of Death to Little Round Top. All of these are post-battle names, by the way. These are names that veterans and authors and other people have come up with to make sense of this chaotic event called the Battle of Gettysburg. So on July 2nd, 1863, while this fight is going on, Union soldiers are occupying Little Round Top, and there's going to be a massive fight up there. And I think we're going to talk about that when we're up on the hill.
Let's take a walk.
All right, let's do it.
So Gary, we have crossed the Valley of Death. We've come to the top of Little Round Top. This is a spectacular place. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I mean, I could tell you about its military import and everything like that, but I think you're looking at it right here. Would you want to be down there or up here if you were going to engage in a battle? I mean, this is a substantial height. It is crowned by boulders and loose stones that could be formed into an easy breastwork. It's called that because it comes up to about here. And the Union is going to make it their left flank. See, the Union left flank was at Devil's Den for a while, and then when the Confederates captured it, there was a new Union left flank up here on this hill. So for that reason, because of the attack and defense of this hill, Little Round Top, we still talk about this place to this day, and I'm here with you today shooting video.
To my good fortune. It wasn't originally appreciated quite so well by the Union Army, but then they finally understand, gosh, we really need to secure that spot.
Yeah, the story goes, and we have a lot written about this stuff, but I have to back up a little bit to say that the 10,000 soldiers on this part of the line, the Union line is in the shape of a fish hook, and the guy in command of this part, that might include Little Round Top, named Dan Sickles, didn't have military training. He's a brave enough guy, and raised his own regiment and everything like that. And he would have liked Little Round Top if he came up here. He wasn't stupid, right? But he didn't like the ground to the north of here. It was low and wooded, and he feared that some of the woodlots you can still see out here to this day would allow the enemy to get right near his line. So he fretted and worried about this all day until eventually he moves his men off of this line and out to a promontory out there called the Peach Orchard. It was just a peach orchard at the time. Now it's the Peach Orchard. So he moves his men off of this line, and this is left undefended until a man named Gouverneur Kemble Warren shows up. Now, here's his statue here. This guy is the chief engineer of the Union Army, and if a topographical engineer knows anything, he knows topography, the lay of the land. So Warren comes up here and sees there's no Union troops on this very important position, and he's horrified. And through his efforts, in about 20 minutes, he's able to get Union troops over to that side of the hill 5 minutes before the Southerners attack. You could say that's the same 5 minutes that the exhausted rebels are resting on Big Round Top, but you have to rest on Big Round Top, and that's going to set up this massive clash on the south side of this hill.
We should go check it out.
We should. Let's go.
Gary, we've come a little further south on Little Round Top. We're next to a castle, which is one of the most recognizable spots here. And this is really kind of the heart of the fighting.
Yes, you're right. I mean, who wouldn't love a castle and a rocky hill? And, you know, the rocks were here at the time, but the castle was not. And this is the side of the hill where everything took place. Now, the commander that Ward was able to indirectly get up here is named Vincent. First in his class at Harvard, 25 years old, and he is ready to fight. And he's smart. He doesn't put his men up here on the crest. He puts them down there on the military crest. See, let me explain. Down there on the military crest, you can have a greater field of fire so people can't hide behind the hill. If you have to fall back, you're still on the hill. You don't form a convenient silhouette on top, and cannons can fire over your head. So he was smart to put his men from Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania, and Maine on this side of the hill. And they didn't have time to build the impressive stone walls you see here. They just got here just a few minutes before the Confederates launched their attack.
Now, the fighting here gets pretty intense. Vincent doesn't survive. How do these men then make it through the battle?
Yeah, so I mean, luckily, for Vincent and for the, you might say, Union cause, these men knew what to do. This isn't the first year of the Civil War. These are veterans. These are people who had been in battles before, and if somebody goes down, there is a replacement for them. If the brigade commander goes down, a senior colonel comes up, and someone takes over for him and him and him, and that means you have people doing new jobs during the most chaotic event you can imagine. But Vincent is up here right as the Confederates attack once, and they're repulsed. Twice they're repulsed. These are Texans and Alabamians here, and they're starting to succeed because they're moving around the flank of those Michiganders I see over there, right? So they begin to fall back, and it was right behind the camera, supposedly, where Strong Vincent actually was trying to rally the men from Michigan using a riding crop when he would receive his mortal wound over there. But the Michiganders knew what to do, and luckily for them, some New Yorkers showed up just on the spur of the moment. Again, G.K. Warren, the general, helped to get these guys up here, and 540 men from Rochester, New York was enough to scare these Texans away. But I'm going to keep going here, Chris. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So right after that, the fight has begun to move further into the woods because the soldiers had to take longer to get there. See, they had to climb a big hill called Big Round Top. This is Little Round Top. I guess you can guess which one's larger?
Big Round Top.
You got it. And they're going to go up the hill and down the other side, so it takes them longer to get there. But those Alabamians are going to engage in a particularly desperate firefight with Pennsylvania and Maine troops in the woods, and it goes back and forth like a great wave until a third of the men from Maine are down, a third of the men from Alabama are down. Both sides are already searching for cartridges and bullets from their dead and wounded comrades, and they see the Confederates forming for their fourth or fifth charge at that point. And that's when the colonel of the Maine regiment over there, you've heard of him, what's his name?
Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain.
Yes, another man who didn't have a whole lot of military training, but he was experienced by the time he got here, and he realized he couldn't fall back, he needs to advance, and they're going to put bayonets on the end of their guns, and they're going to charge down into the weary Confederates who had stayed up all night, had marched more than 20 miles to get here, carrying 50 pounds of stuff each on what would become the second hottest day of the summer, over by far the most difficult terrain Gettysburg has to offer. And they're doing that mostly without any water. And Chamberlain's charge into these exhausted rebels is going to succeed. They're going to chase them back up Big Round Top, where many of them surrender, not thinking about rotting away in a northern prison, thinking, I need to rest right now. We're all like that, right?
Yeah.
You ever been tired, hungry, and thirsty and tried to think about it something other than food, water, and sleep? So the Union wins the Battle of Little Round Top here. It was an intense attack and defense. The Union holds it, and they're going to make some good use of it for the rest of the battle.
And we've got more of the second day's fighting to explore.
Yes, we've seen the Devil's Den, we've seen Little Round Top, but we still have the Wheatfield, the Peach Orchard, and a number of other places to at least talk about or maybe even visit.
Well, let's take a look.
Let's do it.
The northern slopes of Little Round Top are behind me. Gary's going to catch up with us in just a little bit over at the Peach Orchard, but first I want to stop here at the Wheatfield to meet up with my friend John Hoptak, a historian from the National Park Service. John, how are you today?
Doing great, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks for being out here in the rain with us. Beautiful day though, and a beautiful spot. Yet the story here, not so beautiful.
Right. We're standing in Farmer George Rose's 26-acre wheat field, the scene of some of the most horrific combat that took place during the three-day Battle of Gettysburg. So impossible today to fully grasp, get a sense of the intensity of the combat that raged here. But for about 3 hours on that hot Thursday, July afternoon, July 2nd, The fighting would sweep back and forth across these 26 acres, and about 6,000 soldiers would be listed among the killed, wounded, or captured just from the battle action here.
So who's coming from where when the armies first clash in this spot?
Right, well initially, just the southern edge of the Wheatfield, off in the distance, near the edge of that woodlot, held by United States soldiers of the 3rd Corps. Reinforcements will be making their way toward us, but from out yonder, further to the west, Confederate soldiers from Hood's division and later from McLaws' division will arrive from the south, they'll arrive from the west, and they'll be able to hit this Wheatfield position from 2 sides.
So you've got guys over here, 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 here. It seems like a real confusing mess.
It is a very confusing mess. And during the course of those 3 hours, there were soldiers here belonging to no fewer than 13 different Union brigades and 6 different Confederate brigades that would crisscross and fight their way around this 26-acre wheat field.
Now, what impact does this fight have on the larger Battle of Gettysburg?
The fighting that took place here would stall the Confederate approach toward the, I guess you could say, gap in the Union line further off to our north and east. When Dan Sickles moved his men forward, created that gap in the Union position, the Union stance that took place here, the back and forth fighting, would stall the Confederate approach toward that critical position. So at the end of the day, even though the Confederate Army does gain possession of this field of wheat, they're unable to advance further. And by the time night falls on that Thursday, July 2nd, Confederate soldiers are going to settle in amongst the trees and the rocks surrounding us, surrounding this wheat field, leaving this area basically, I guess, a no man's land in between the 2 lines, just filled with the wounded, the dead, the suffering, the cries of the wounded piercing the night, and soldiers in blue and gray intermingled here in the wheat.
The Rose Farm, the wheat field, was the scene of a lot of post-battle photography that became really important. What insight do those photos give us into this battle?
Oh, I think the photographs taken really sends home the impact of war. I mean, prior to the Civil War, Americans don't get a sense of what combat actually is. They're looking at lithographs, they're looking at, paintings of what combat is. Those photographs bring home the grim reality of it all. And those photographs particularly show the human cost, the devastation, the destruction done by the fighting that took place here. And not just in the wheat field itself, but the tree lots surrounding us, I think is important to remember that they too are a part of the story of the wheat field fight as well.
Now, you can see the wheat field by car, but you can also get out and walk. Some
Right.
great walking trails. What's it like to walk the wheat field?
Well, anywhere on the battlefield, if you're able, I encourage you to get out and explore the ground the way the soldiers would have, because you get a better feel, a better perspective. And we're so fortunate that this land has been preserved and set aside for us to learn from. After 160 years, we still can walk in the wheat field. And I think it is important to walk the ground, walk in the footsteps of those soldiers, and imagine what might have been going through their minds, as they look toward the same woodlots, the same sky above, the same ground below. They're thinking of home, they're thinking of family. But they found themselves in this farmer's wheat field, hundreds of miles in some cases away from their home on that Thursday afternoon, July 2nd.
Great. I'm going to take your advice. I'm going to walk around and explore. John, what a privilege to chat with you today.
Right, thank you, Chris, very much.
As we continue on from the wheat field, we've now reached the peach orchard, where Garry promised he'd meet us. Garry, why is this particular peach orchard the peach orchard?
This one sits on high ground and one from which you can see in every direction. And notably, because of these features, it was actually sought after by Dan Sickles. Remember, his 10,000 men are supposed to be way over there, a half a mile away, but he saw this high ground and felt the Confederates could occupy this peach orchard and pummel his line with artillery while their infantry went over through the woods in the distance I can see and sneak up upon his line. So it's his movement out to this location to prevent that is why this is the peach orchard.
So the Confederates are coming from behind you. Are they moving straight across the field? Do they know that Dan Sickles is here?
If only it's so easy. They would have seen the Union soldiers here when they attacked, but remember, the Confederates are attacking one, then one like this. So by the time they reached here, South Carolinians had already attacked to the south of the peach orchard over there. I can almost picture it. That's the good thing about being on battlefields, right? So they would have attacked this way, and I believe that got the Union attention facing that way, just as 1,300, I think, angry Mississippi soldiers attacked, and literally they hit this position like a hammer, rolled up it, and started to get in behind the Union Army. This is desperate times for the Union here.
And Dan Sickles comes to grief as a result of his foray out here.
Yes, he does indeed. Now, not only to grief, but he's going to be personally injured, which might save his reputation, and we're going to talk about that at our next stop.
So we talked about Dan Sickles coming to grief. He's got a headquarters monument right here. Tell us what happens.
Okay, so we're at the Trossel farm. This is Abraham Trossel, and this is where Dan Sickles makes his headquarters. And he is standing on the far side of that building, watching some of the attack of the Confederates and his line beginning to buckle. And while this is all going on, there's artillery shells flying all over the place and whatnot, and one comes in and hits him square in the leg, and it rips off his leg so it's just left dangling by skin. Now, the story goes that he was carried off the field, coolly smoking a cigar, instructing his staff to complete the amputation of that leg and bathe that leg in alcohol so they could save it. Now, more likely what happened is that his staff, not wanting to alarm the rest of the troops, shoved a cigar in his mouth, gave him some whiskey to calm him, and sat him up while they dragged him off the field or something like that. But nonetheless, they did save the leg. They reconstructed the bones, put it in the Army Medical Museum, and he took friends to visit his leg bones for the remaining years of his life. So that's Dan Sickles for you.
Now, how does the rest of the battle wrap up then on the second day?
Yes, so we are sort of behind the peach orchard. I'm looking at the peach orchard off in the distance there, right? When the peach orchard collapses, I told you the Mississippians get in behind the peach orchard. That's what happens. And some of the cannons that are near the peach orchard begin to retire back this way, okay? So that whole line begins to collapse of the Union, and the Confederates are coming this way, sometimes just as disorganized in victory as the Union is in defeat and retreat. So some of the cannons come back here and they get penned in here at Trossel's farm because there is a stone wall going over there, and there is another wall, a fence over here, and the cannons can't get by, so they array themselves like this, and they're shooting out at their opponents. The Confederates roll over this position, they capture these cannons of a Massachusetts battery here, and continue onward, but the Union seems to have inexhaustible supply of reinforcements. George Gordon Meade is using his fishhook position to send troops back and forth. And wherever the Confederates go, they're met by Union reinforcements, and that's what happened. The whole Confederate line will retreat back to Seminary Ridge. The guns are recaptured here so that the veterans can come back here later and place a monument here.
Now, there are a number of monuments all across the battlefield. We see a couple around us here today. I know it's a significant part of the cultural landscape here. Explain what that means.
Yeah, just real quick. So I'll maintain that you'll see more monuments here at Gettysburg than you'll see anywhere else in the world. 1,400 plus monuments, markers, and tablets, most of which were erected by the veterans themselves. And they did this for us, for future generations to understand what happened where and who made their sacrifices where.
We think about this battlefield in terms of the fighting that took place. We can come here and look at these monuments as a cultural landscape, but we also need to remember this is a patchwork of farms. People lived here before these armies showed up, and then they had to resurrect their lives and pull them back together again afterwards.
Yeah, think about this. This is, people were living here for decades, sometimes several decades before the Battle of Gettysburg, and then one day the troops show up. Okay, they fight here for 3 days, then there's a hospital afterward, and then Lincoln comes here and delivers the Gettysburg Address. This place is forever changed, and it never stopped being changed as a result of this brief period of time to make this place famous. But while we were in the Wheatfield earlier, John Hoptak mentioned that's Rose's Wheatfield. It's Sherfy's peach orchard, okay? It's somebody's Wheatfield because most of the battlefield is fought on farms outside of town. It's hard to fight in town. There's not a whole lot of urban combat in the Civil War, okay? So it is on the fields of the farms where the crops would be destroyed by the troops, where soldiers would be buried where they fell, whose houses would be struck, like this one behind you. And you can even zoom in on a photo, a historic photo, and not only see the dead horses in the foreground, not only see this boulder right here, but you can also see the artillery shell made in Trossel's barn at that time. So, we have testament, we have the claims forms of these farmers of what they went through with poison wells and crop loss and losing their fences. I mean, these fences were built by them. You know how hard it is to build a stone wall like this? So it's important to remember the people who actually lived here, and this was not an event that, people flock to Gettysburg now because we think it's interesting. We think it's fascinating. This is not what it was like for the people who lived here.
So Garry, we've been talking here about the fighting on this part of the battlefield, Little Round Top, Devil's Den, the Wheatfield, the Peach Orchard. There's also fighting going on at the other end of the Union position. We should go take a look.
Yeah, you know, it's designed to sort of happen at the same time, but as it is, all that fighting you talked about took place in the afternoon, and then at twilight and dusk and in the dark, you actually have fighting on East Cemetery Hill and then on Culp's Hill, and that Culp's Hill fighting will bleed into the next day for 7 more hours before the famous attack on the third day called Pickett's Charge.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust's YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.